Hello.
Hello. Oh,
Hey.
isn't this
Oh,
fun?
was that? I thought you just. Was that loud?
No, it sounded okay.
Ah.
Whoa, that was loud.
Okay. Yeah. I will not do that then. Oh, good. Well. Yeah. Welcome to podcast number 3. We're doing this about 20, 30 kilometers away from each other this time
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
Yes.
not overly bad, but it's
Yeah.
interesting because we've normally been in the same room, so we've got like
Mm,
random microphones and Skypes going everywhere, so
yeah.
hopefully it all works okay.
Should sound good. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've established the typical something will go wrong thing, and in this instance, it was I couldn't find the wing guard for one of my mics, so I was just like, I'll just use this one instead. Good thing I have 5. This should go all right.
Should be okay. The
Yeah.
only thing you might get from my end is some random breathing noises if I forget to go away from the microphone, but
That's
know.
all right. We can get rid of that in post production.
yeah, we all love a bit of loud breathing anyway, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all good.
Like, in fact, I had an email recently. I got lots of emails from Isotope because they're releasing RX5
Oh, of course.
within the month. And I'm like, oh. So I'm just gonna see how much they charge for the loyal customers to see what the upgrade is. But yeah, everything about it sounds really good. And in fact, I used a bit of RX4 with one of my friends and helping him with the recording. And I've never really used the spectral repair thing in it. But the moment I used it, then I was like, holy crud, because he had a recording in a church and people were throwing, well, they weren't throwing Bibles, but it sounded like they were, because there were large bangs and crashes everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And then I just used spectral repair and it magically disappeared. And I was like,
Wow.
whoa, this is awesome. So, yeah, I've had that software for upwards of a year and I've never really done that. And I was just like, whoa. Anyway, that's
Awesome.
my music story. There you go. There's the podcast. Thanks for
Yeah,
listening.
you heard it here first, folks.
Catch you next time. Yeah. All right.
All right, we should get into the
Anyway,
games, though.
get into the actual things.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, our topic for this week came about from actually playing very, very modern games. I mean, I believe we've both at least tried Mad Max. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I've played a little bit of it now. Managed to get it working pretty well, and I can't remember exactly. I think I just got up to something important, so that was good.
That narrows it
been-
down.
It's been a little while. It's been like a week and a bit since I played it
Oh,
last.
yeah, that
but
reminds me. Yeah, before we carry on, we need to congratulate you because you won, what was it, Best Blokes Band Award or something like that?
Yeah, so Richard and I haven't. We've had a week off from recording because I was over in Melbourne, Australia, at the National Barbershop Championships with my quartet, and we actually took out the first place prize in the quartet competition. So that was good fun.
So does that mean you're the best in Australia now?
Yeah, that means we're the best barbershop quartet in Australia. So
Very nice. Celebrity.
I know,
the
right?
first celebrity on the podcast.
I know
excellent.
it's great. It's a big burden, but I'm sure all of the dozens of people that know what's involved with that appreciate it very much. No, but it was good fun. I do have something. Just if I can steal another minute before we start talking
go for
about
it.
games. I did have a cool gaming related thing that happened. One of the people that we went along with brought to our attention this place in Melbourne called Zero Latency, which is a place. It's like you walk in, it's a big warehouse, and they basically do a virtual reality gaming thing there. So you strap a computer to your back, and then you put on an Oculus Rift and a headset, and then you go around killing zombies for about an hour. And not only was it kind of the first time I'd done anything like that, it was the first time I've really played with the Oculus Rift to any great extent. And I have to say, having the full thing, it's is incredibly immersive and very good fun. I think they're quite heavily booked because they've only been open for a little while. But if you're in Melbourne and you want something cool gaming-wise to check out, definitely go and try and book and get in a slot there because it was very good fun. It's crazily immersive. I didn't think I'd get as involved as I did.
Oh, yeah. No, I haven't actually used the Oculus Rift, but I've seen many people use it. And it does look quite interesting. I mean, I'm too fearful of people stealing my stuff the moment I completely take away my vision. So, maybe I should try it like that, where I won't get stuff nicked from my pockets as I'm going, whoa.
Yeah, that's it.
That sounds good.
um,
Yeah, and you've done a lot this week, which compared to me is, fantastic. I've pretty much just worked on uni stuff as well. I've done lots of coding junk.
oh,
Horrible,
cool.
horrible work. I won't get into it because that's not what this is about. We need to carry on. But yeah, I did lots of coding stuff for uni, and that was horrendous. I'm also doing lots of website stuff recently as well, getting into the whole fancy JavaScript animation type thing.
Oh,
But
cool. Yeah.
anyway, we were talking about Mad Max. You said that you've tried it.
Yeah, I've gotten up to past the first area. I was just about off to move off into the real world. But yeah, enough to talk a bit about the general music and audio of the game.
Yeah.
Which I was so far, I mean, very limited experience so far of what I have, but I have enjoyed it so far, the game overall, but I feel so far the audio and the music has been done quite well.
Well, I've played it all the way through to the end. I finished it on the weekend, I think, which in terms of this recording was a couple of days ago. And yeah, I really enjoy the sound effects mostly. I mean, the music is good. It's typical, which, as we've established in the previous podcast, I'm not too fussed by typical music. But in terms of sound effects, they were great. Like, I really enjoyed driving along purely because the car engine sound effects were great and fantastic to kind of listen to as you're riding along in the wastes.
Sure.
The storms are the storms are crazy too. Like, I remember them because the first time they occurred, it was like, storms coming, brace yourself, or get into hiding. And I'm like, storms? Pfft, what are they going to do? And then it just hits you like a ton of bricks. But I think it hits you like a ton of bricks because the sound is suddenly just there with a click. It's relatively silent. You hear a light breeze, and then it's just like for like 2 to 3 minutes. I tried to do that away from the mic because I would have definitely clipped that if I had done that with the mic. But yeah, like the sound is completely smothering there, and that's a fantastic example of really good sound design.
I have to say overall, one thing I really loved about the sound design in the game as well is apart from those moments when there is action happening, English. Even just the general ambience of the game is very nice. Like, just driving around, I've only really spent time in the whatever they called it, the Great White or the White Sands or whatever it's called. And that at the beginning is a very desolate place. So you're expecting it to be quite empty. But what often can happen with things like that and areas like that is that people just choose to kind of ignore and. I remember reading an article a little while ago. I won't try and remember what it's called, but they were talking to one of the very well-known sound designers in Hollywood, and one thing he said is very important was in those things you have to think about all of the sounds that would be happening at a scene, not just the very obvious kind of Foley stuff. And that's one thing that I think has been done quite well in Mad Max. Even just establishing that atmosphere of a bit of wind or the sounds of not much at all. But it's just enough in there that playing. I think I mostly played with headphones in as well, and you really got that sense of being involved in the world, which is always very nice.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, I loved Mad Max despite it having very polarizing reviews. But it brings us to what we're actually talking about this podcast, which is how important audio is for music. And there's a very good reason why we specifically chose this, because it sounds very vague. I mean, of course, if you ask someone how important audio is for games, they'll be like, "Did I say how important audio is for music a while back?" I think never mind.
We generally talk about that anyway, so
I'm slurring my words now. How important audio is for games. If you ask someone that, of course they're going to be like, "Oh yeah, sure." But we've had experiences both from playing games and writing for games and such that states that there's a few people who don't get that. But we'll talk about that later. For the moment, let's just go through a few more modern stuff that we've really liked for the sound design, because we're musicians, might as well splurge about things that we like. Now, I know you have Metal Gear Solid 5, but have you tried it yet?
I have. I played a little bit of it. I've played a couple of missions, and
Hmm.
look, so far, I mean, well, I mean that is a game that's been getting rave reviews, but I have to say,
Hmm.
I absolutely love the detail that's gone into the audio in that game
Hmm.
on both ends of things. You know, well, Kojima Productions and the man himself are very well known for their attention to detail in the
Hmm.
games, and it comes through in both aspects. I mean, the music is top notch.
Hmm.
Oh, that's embarrassing. I've just forgotten the composer's name at the moment.
I forget.
Justin something.
Yeah, I forget the guy, but
But Harry
I think
Gregson
Harry Gregson.
Williams,
Yeah.
he did produce. I mean, he wrote the music for the past two or
Hmm.
three, let's say numbered Metal Gear Solid games, the major releases, and he supervised a lot of that. And
Yeah.
the great thing about his music for that and the new composer that's taken over,
Yeah.
is that the one thing I've always loved about them is they managed to get that mix of like classic orchestral scoring and really modern hybrid synthy stuff
Hmm.
really well.
Hmm.
The first part of the game is like a big half an hour long prologue that you kind of go through. You control yourself, but it's largely scripted.
Yeah.
And
Oh man, that first hour was great. Like
it
that's up
was
there with like Fallout 3 for best first hour of a game for
Oh,
me.
it was intense. And
Hmm.
one other thing I love with the music though, and it's been a common feature in all of the games, is that they're not scared to give you the freedom to kind of control your musical experience of the game as well. And I
Hmm.
think, well, I mean, it's very telling. You know, one thing that was really cool opening the game up for the very first time, and you know, if you haven't played it yet and you don't want to spoil your experience with anything, then you know, don't listen for the next minute or two. But so you open up the game, and the first thing you see is you kind of coming to in the hospital bed, and
Hmm.
then you hear over the radio David Bowie, the man who sold the world,
Hmm.
which is a great track, but that really sums up one thing for me that I love about the Metal Gear Solid games is that they don't mind giving you the ability to choose what you listen to. Like, in this game on the PC version, well, you find tapes with music in it throughout the games, but
Hmm.
you can also feed in your own audio. There's a folder on the PC game in one of the directories where you can load up your own music and play it in the game.
Hmm.
And I remember as well in Metal Gear Solid 4, they actually gave you like a little virtual iPod that you could control in the game. And that one just had the music that was on the game, but they give you a big selection of like classic Metal Gear Solid tracks, music from the new game, like podcasts,
Hmm.
and just kind of that's one thing that is actually really cool about the game. As much as the built-in music and stuff like that is amazing, you know, by giving the player the ability to kind of choose their own, if they kind of prefer something different, I think that's a really excuse me, it's kind of a not really a risky move, but it's a very daring move to kind of hand that over. But
Yeah.
it's one that I think works really well. And it's something that, well, I mean, we've seen it before. There's the classic thing with the Ridge Racer games on PlayStation where you could take out the disc and put in your own audio disc. But
Hmm.
I think it's something that, when appropriate, is always something that I like to see in games.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm. I mean, yeah, I'm more personally for well, no, I suppose it's a preference, isn't it? Just I like you having the music that was made for the game when playing, but I suppose it doesn't really affect me if that option is there. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
sure, and I'm the same as well.
Mm,
Um, but I think it is nice, and the other thing is as well, like it ties in with the audio as well, so you do get like, because it's essentially a tape player in Metal Gear Solid 5 that you're using.
mm,
So it's just a nice little feature, but you do kind of use it a lot anyway, just for like audio briefings or little like actual tapes that you pick up in the game throughout the way. So,
yeah, yeah.
well, I always listen to the built-in music myself as well, and
Mm,
it's just a nice little feature. One thing I will say though is that I actually didn't want to use it too heavily anyway, because Metal Gear Solid 5 is another game where the general sound design of the world has been done very well. I noticed it straight
Mm.
away. This is a big open world game. Like you're essentially just playing in. I don't know how. I can't remember off the top of my head how large the overall world area is in Metal Gear Solid 5, but it's set in
Mm.
Afghanistan, and it feels like it's a large chunk of what would be in the real world in that
Yeah,
game.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
I've gone not quite far. I think my thing says 6%, but that is apparently quite far. Because I've done like 10, 12 missions or something like that. Yeah, and the sound design for me, like the moment you got off the helicopter for the first time, I was like, yeah, okay, this is gonna be good sound design because they got the kind of opening rush of wind that comes in through the helicopter once you open the door, like almost perfectly. I was
mm,
like, oh, that's good. That sounds excellent.
yeah.
So the
Uh,
sound design for me was fantastic in that.
oh, for sure, I agree. And I just one little aside on that. One thing that I think is just brilliant is the fact that you can choose to blast out Ride of the Valkyries through your helicopter
Mm,
loudspeakers as you fly and land. To start your mission. It's not something that I've done personally, but I just
mm.
really appreciate that little touch.
Yeah, no, it's great. And just before we carry on, according to Wikipedia, the composers are Ludwig Forssell, Justin Burnett, and Daniel James.
Justin Burnett, that's the one I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think they've done a top-notch job with the music, but music and audio overall, big tick.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's a good thing for doing this apart. It means I actually have a computer in front of me to check these things as opposed to just going, I think it's that.
Yeah.
Like an amendment to our last podcast, I said that Jennifer Curry was the composer for Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, but I think it's Jessica. Or it might be the other way around. I'm just fucking up again. Hang on. Everyone's Gone to the Rapture. The Rapture composer. Jessica Curry. Okay. There's my
There we go.
amendment from last podcast. It's Jessica, not Jennifer. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so the music was really good in Metal Gear Solid. I'll say
Yeah.
one more that I've been playing a lot recently, which is Coming Heroes 2, because the British came out. And Coming Heroes 2 was one my absolute favorite RTS at the moment. And I'm a avid RTS player. But two, the sound design that has been amazing, and it's just reminded me coming back with the British because uh, one of the reasons I love Company Heroes 2 over any other RTS is just how immersive it is. And I think that's to do with a lot of the sound design because they've got like your individual units have lots of different things they say, both outside and inside fighting. It reacts accordingly. So, when you're talking to an engineer like outside of battle, they're just like, hello, Sarge, or something like that. But when they're in the fight, they're just like, what the hell do you want? I mean, yeah, we're being shot. And that's really, really well done and very immersive. So I'm just giving a quick nod to the Common Heroes 2 for really good sound design if you want to listen to that.
Oh, completely agree. I mean, that's one thing that I loved about both of the games because they did do it well in the first one as well. The unit dialogue. I think one thing that Company of Heroes does well with the general audio of the game that I don't recall many other games in that genre doing it to the same level. There are plenty of strategy games with good audio, but none of them I've really felt that overall sense of let's say urgency, but also just chaos that happens when you're in the middle of a firefight in the game. Like you can hear every explosion, you can hear like the rubble hitting, you can hear people yelling and screaming, and tanks rolling along. And if you're playing with in any way with like headphones or something where the sound really just surrounds you, it's like it's good when you kind of get caught up in the thing. You're not just kind of sitting back detached from it. It really sucks you in.
Oh yeah,
And
for sure.
yeah, I've not experienced that at the same level with another game in that genre, which is just fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love the screaming artillery that you can get. The ones which actually have like sound like they're screaming as they come down. Like,
Oh yeah.
They're really cool. That I use them even if like I don't even need to use them. I just use them because I like listening to them. Yeah, but anyway, those are three kind of, I guess we can, we can definitely call them AAA game examples of really good audio in like the last month,
Oh, sure, yeah.
which is good. But the whole talk of this podcast, which we're going along quite nicely, is like how important is the audio, and we've already established kind of very important if we're talking about this sort of thing. But what is the reason we're going to talk about, or we are talking about this, I should say? There's actually a pretty good reason. Like, if you remember correctly, I think it was 2014's Global Game Jam. I think it's that one.
It was last year, yeah.
Yeah, we both went to the Perth one in that. And it was very interesting going because one, it was our first time. It was the first time actually going, hey, we're audio guys. We make music, yada yada. But it was interesting in that all the kind of noobs, I guess, amateurs, people interested in game design but haven't really done anything. It's called more of a hobby or an interest. They clearly didn't care, either didn't care for the audio or just didn't understand how important it was for their games. And it was interesting because you went with an actual game company called Stirfire Studios, I think.
Yep, that's
and
the
they were very much aware that they needed you to make it good.
Yeah, sure. Because well, basically, what just happened for everyone's benefit when we got in, because we were kind of more so than being new, we didn't really know many people there. They kind of ushered everyone into a room who was kind of staring around looking lost, and they rolled us around to some of the other groups that had already kind of started, and went around looking like, what do you do? Do you need some audio, or do you need like an artist or whatever? So when I went off with the Stirfire guys, we sat down right from the start. They were obviously still working out their concept. I'm just trying to remember what the theme was for that year. That it's vastly important to what we're talking about, but it was.
I can't remember what
gone.
It was. It was some kind of sentence, some kind of weird proverb.
Yeah, it was something about like experiencing the same thing in different ways or coming back to something. Anyway, so they were still sitting down working through the theme, and right from the beginning they kind of sat down and they had the general thing worked out. So I think basically by the time I got there, they'd worked out that it was kind of like a 20s or 30s kind of noirish kind of vibe. And they had a few different sections. So the game was set in a train. And so obviously there were some different carriages. They had like a first class carriage, a third class carriage, and a dining car, I think. And we knew that. So you'd be going through it once as an adult and going through it once as a child. So like we decided that was going to be different. And then later on, we just kind of did some very basic Foley, nothing too important, but a few steps and things like that. But that was quite useful for me because, the whole idea with the game jam is you get 48 hours to make the game. So for me to have most of that time to sit down and write, because I ended up having to push out a reasonable amount of music in that time. It was essentially 3 different pieces with 2 versions. So I what did I do? I did like a string quartets, like a jazzy kind of Charleston-esque thing and something else. And then I did the different version of them using Music Box. But yeah, basically to come back from the ramble, I guess, they knew, because they've made a few games before and published them and gone through that whole thing, they did know that, right from the start, they would need this stuff by the end. So it was good. Obviously with a proper process, it'd be more back and forth. It just kind of ended up being like dumping the files on, and they ran them through Unity and put them in. But they definitely were aware, and they were, they wanted the audio in there from the start. They knew kind of what they wanted, which was very useful as a composer.
Yeah, which is good because they have experience in it, as you said. But the large majority of everyone else didn't really know. It was interesting because if I remember correctly, the organizers did say right at the start, like, if you have audio, get audio early because you do need it. Because apparently it's a very common thing for new people to just completely forget about the audio in their kind of game jam, which is which is unfortunate, I guess.
Yeah,
But
it's one of those things that if you do kind of miss it, or you come back at the end and you think, oh shit, now we've got to put in audio, like there's just not going to be time unless you know, like literally try and find something off the internet or something and paste it in. Like,
yeah.
you know, you need time to develop the audio just as much as you do need to develop like the art or the gameplay engine or whatever you're building for the
Yeah,
game.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, and yeah, if anyone wants to know what I did during that global game jam, the theme, which I've again checked because I have the computer in front of me, was we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Which is a
Which
cool
is
theme.
yeah, which is where the whole train thing came about with yours. I worked with a bunch of nice guys who made a game called Dwarf Squad, which was funny because the obviously the music was very fantasy-esque, but the
It's
game.
a cracking theme, by the way. I'll just say that.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, yeah. I'll add a little extra on the end of that. But the game was essentially you were running around as dwarfs, and when you ran into each other, it messed up the controls and started shifting controls to other people, which is the whole idea of see things as we are, yada yada. But that was fun to play and fun to do as well. I made some cracking punching sounds.
Oh, they were top notch.
Yeah, which
Very
I was
meaty, which is always good with the
very
punching
proud of.
sound.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, the extra thing I want to say with the Dwarf Squad piece, Dwarf Squad Ho, I think is the piece. The piece is called, and it's on my SoundCloud, and it's like the second most viewed thing on my SoundCloud. But
oh well.
well, no. The weird thing about it is that at least 80% of that must be from an app called Roll20 or something like that, which is basically a kind of chat app for people playing Dungeons and Dragons esque games over online. So it's apparently what it does is it searches for SoundCloud based things based on tags and such, and so I'm guessing dwarf was a very common theme for people who like to Dungeon and Dragon it up across the world online. So it has a lot of views, maybe in the 3,000, 4,000 now.
Wow.
My first place, I think, is my Lego movie remix, or it might be the Wreck-It Ralph one. But that's like in the 10,000s, I think. So I'm doing all right, SoundCloud wise.
Jeez. Talking about celebrities over here, Mr.
Not quite. 10,000 is
big spender.
10,000 is really nothing compared when it comes to this sort of things. But yeah, like I did that and it was good fun. Now, when I listen back to it, I cringe a little at the mixing, but otherwise, that works out all right.
For such a short time, it worked well. But I think as well, it's just worth pointing out that that was very much because I remember we had a chat afterwards because you were staying with me because the game jam venue was close to me, so we left after a while to just come back and write because we didn't really need to be there the whole time because we weren't actually contributing to the design or the building of the games. After a while, I was just like, I'll see you tomorrow. But yeah, I do recall like when we were chatting and just from seeing it, you very much with those guys, like they just kind of gave you an idea of what the game was and then let you go on your merry way. And
that was it. I kind of made work for myself because they didn't say, could we have sound effects or like music or anything? Well, no, they did want music, obviously, because I was in their group. But it wasn't like, we want this type of music, we want this type of music. They were like, do what you want. And I was like, okay, I will do all the things audio. So I did all the sound effects and all the music and junk, and it was good fun. But it was very clear that they were the type of people who weren't aware how important the audio was until the end, which was very depressing because when they showed it off, the audio didn't work on the Mac.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so no one actually got to hear it. I was very disappointed. That was cried myself to sleep for the next week.
Oh, yeah. Oh well,
but it's long gone now. It's all good. But the whole reason I'm talking about this is that there's a lot of, I guess we'll call them indies, who don't really get how important audio is, and it's unfortunate that this carries on onto games that are officially released on markets like Steam. and all that. I mean, we've played our fair share of indie games where we've just gone, ugh, this music, or ugh, this sound design, and just left it
Yeah.
plenty of times. I have a few examples, which I'll say in a bit, but yeah, like
Yeah, well, I
yeah.
think it's something that I think it's much easier. We can see it's much easier to overlook when you might be like a smaller studio or kind of especially from the kind of lower end of the indie spectrum, let's say, because I know there are some studios that are technically indie, but kind of fairly well resourced. Can understand why you might not even intentionally, just unintentionally, kind of neglect the audio a bit. And I guess it's one of those things that you might not even realize. I guess speaking as a creative, like as much as particularly with writing music, it's one of those. It's very much like an introspective thing. A lot of the time, you kind of have to sit down, plug in your headphones, lock yourself away, and do your own thing. You always have to remember that the outside perspective is very useful, even if it's just having a second set of ears to listen over things and kind of point out things that because you've had your track on repeat for like 50 times
Yeah.
and you're not hearing something anymore. And I think the same thing applies to a lot of developers. They spend so much time building the game, designing the game or whatever, that if they haven't thought about the audio already, they might not realize because they're just in a different mindset. And the problem with that is when it does get out to the consumer, they're having a different experience to you because they haven't put hours and hours into the game building it, and they don't know it as well. So all they get is what comes up when they download your game and install it and click play. And if the audio is not up to scratch, you will notice. And
Oh yeah.
unfortunately, even if it's a cracking game and it's got a brilliant concept behind it, if that's lacking, it can ruin the game for you, as we've said. And I'm sure it happens. I know we probably get it a bit worse because we spend so much time with audio that it's like a sensitive subject to us almost.
Yeah.
But I know I've spoken to plenty of people who've had bad experiences with bad audio, and it's always an important thing to remember.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I'll reinforce that idea with by firing off a lot of examples of indie games which I've considered the audio to be subpar or even bad. So here goes. It's not a very long list. I've narrowed it down. Luckily, I could make it a lot longer, but I won't.
Oh, it's all right. We really don't need the time on it, so
Yeah.
it's all good.
Yeah. All right. Well, the first one, which I remember specifically, was Salvation Prophecy, which is an indie kind of space shooter / management type thing on Steam. And I bought it because one, it was cheap, and two, I really enjoy sci-fi stuff. So I was like, why not? And the audio was bad. Like if I remember correctly, when I started, I chose the robot army, and then when I was put into their ship, there was no music whatsoever. It was absolutely deathly silent. It felt weird. And then I went to my first fight, and I went down to the ground into this I guess I would draw parallels to Battlefront 2 and things like that in terms of the fight. But the music was pretty decent. I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. This 2-minute loop. But then I tried shooting the gun, and it was a single sample of a laser gun, which we haven't really gone into detail of this, but there's this thing in audio called the machine gun effect, which is if you have a sound effect that is exactly the same and repeat it over and over again, it sounds very computerized and jarring because it doesn't sound realistic at all. It sounds literally like a computer's doing it. And this is exactly how it sounded here with the laser shots. Because it was only one sample, it just sounded really mechanical. And I quickly became a melee fighter purely because I didn't want to hear that at all. But then I found that that music which I enjoyed was the only music it had. So every time I fought, it was the same music. And then when I went into space, the music was decent, but it sounded like idle music, like you would do if you stopped your ship and was quickly checking things in your inventory or something. But I was in the middle of a giant firefight, and it was playing this kind of ambient music. So overall, Salvation Prophecy had very bad audio. And I remember it because that was one of my first Steam reviews that got actual likes and dislikes and all that junk. Because everyone's like, yeah, I agree, and boo, no, don't. Da, da, da. Yes, that's one of my prime examples, because everything else about it I thought was actually pretty good, but the audio just ruined it for me.
Yeah.
Another good example, sorry, I'm just going to fire these off
Go
quickly
ahead. Yeah,
because we
go
are
ahead.
going through quick.
Yeah.
Was this game called The Secret of Riotcon? I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly, Riotcon, because it's very oddly spelled. But it's basically where you're some kind of bird flying through this wilderness and you've got to kind of find some magic junk. I forget exactly what it's about, but I remember it because the music was minimalist in the raw term, as in it was very Steve Reich type of minimalism.
All right.
And I felt it worked, but also didn't work because I'd be listening to it for solid 10-minute rounds. So I'd be going through the forest and be like, God damn it, hurry up and change music. I just want to hear something new. So that was another good example because I remember enjoying that game, but I also remember the audio being like, with it, so I didn't really get very far. My third example is, and I'm sure this was one which will cop a lot of flack, but Starbound, the fancy pants sci-fi Terraria clone on Steam. Now I know a lot of people who really enjoy that game, and I enjoyed it too. But the music for me was an interesting one because technically it's good. I think we talked about this in Pikmin actually, in our Pikmin run through. So I'm going to repeat myself a bit here because technically the music was good, but it was 3-minute good, not 15-minute good, as it
Yeah.
actually is. So when you're listening to it, or when I was listening to it, I was very much like, oh yeah, this music is really good actually. I'm really enjoying this. But when it got to the 15-minute mark and it was the exact same thing, I was like, no, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Change the music, please. And it's even worse on the soundtrack because I got the special edition, which you get the soundtrack, and it was like, I think they said like between 2 and 4 hours of music. I was like, sweet, between 2 and 4 hours of music. But then I realized that if they actually cut it down to the amount of music that you'd listen to before getting bored of it, it would be less than an hour.
Wow.
And yeah, and that was a real, not a deal breaker, but it was certainly something that I was significantly interested in because it was a very, very popular game. But the music was just stretched too far beyond its limit, which is a shame.
Sure.
But I don't think that's a case of the developers not appreciating audio. I think that was just a case of the rule of writing a theme and then arranging it for the next. No. What's the rule for film music? I think it's write 10 minutes of music and then arrange it over and over until you have an hour. I think that's the general rule of
roughly
music.
something like that.
I think the composer did that in a very literal sense.
Yeah, well, there's arrangement and there's
repeating,
looping.
Yeah.
No, but it does raise an interesting point. And again, I think this is something that we did kind of touch on in the Pikmin playthrough. But mentioning film composition is a very interesting point, I think, because it does drive home something that I think is quite often lacking in the indie games, and that is, and this isn't necessarily a slight at the developer all the time, but one thing that I think is normally a hallmark of let's say poorly written or kind of music that's not as good is that the care hasn't been taken to score the game, let's say. And we already know that game writing is different to film writing because there are obviously sections of the game where you have to consider that you can't control how long people are in the area for, so you have to think about looping or layering in music. But the one thing that I think, and this definitely happens in I played Starbound, and this is an example of this, but you could find a ton of indie games that this happens where that you just kind of get the track, and then or as you were saying in Salvation Prophecy, your little rundown there, it doesn't flow according to what's happening. One other thing that is a quote that I'm not going to be able to remember who to attribute to with film music was, they're saying that, there's a reason that films have music. If you wanted to be completely realistic, obviously you wouldn't have music playing over the top of people's lives. But, when you're watching a movie on the screen, you're expecting something to be there, and sometimes you need the music to carry over the emotional content or whatever of the film.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies in games. You can lose the mood of a game if the music doesn't match what's happening. And again, this is something that more often than not, you find the AAA's nail, and there's many. There are indie games that nail it as well. But a lot of the top games I can think of recently that I've really enjoyed, like, you notice when the music changes, and whether it is that kind of reactive music kind of thing where there are things coming in and dropping out, or whether it's just well-written music that kind of fits the mood of what's happening. It's a very important part of the game, and those are definitely examples of games where that hasn't been done. And maybe it's a kind of a few shortcuts being taken with the music. Maybe they didn't have the time or the budget to do any more than what they did. But that just goes to show that it's a risk you take, and it doesn't always work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned that some indie games do a good job of the music, which we should really rattle out a few just to even the load, because it sounds like I've just taken a giant, as is the case with most of what I talk about. Sounds like I've taken a giant dump on indie games. So
not at all.
Yeah, let's rattle off a few that have done a good job. What have done? Oh, well, we both played Binding of Isaac for both the original and the
hours, yeah.
Rebirth. Hours upon hours. I'm pretty sure both of the versions on my Steam are at 200 something hours each. But the music in that is fantastic. Even with the sudden shift that happened with Rebirth, because they had, God, I don't remember his name. It's European, like John Starvansky or something like that.
Yeah.
What's his name? Come help me, computer. Binding Isaac, composer. But yeah, he wrote the music for the original one, and it was really good. Danny Baranowski.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, he did a really good job. Like, it was dark, but it was at the same time kind of playful, which is exactly how I feel Binding of Isaac is. It's a very, very dark game, but its art style and general kind of presentation is kind of childish.
There's cutesy in there as well, and like visually, it's a cool little contrast between this really kind of morbid thing that's happening and this environment, and then there's like big eyes and smiling faces and things like that, and that's reflected well in the music. On both sides of the coin, it's very dark music, but there's he's done very well at putting that kind of not humorous, but that kind of light-hearted touch into the music as well.
Yeah, which is interesting because when it was shifted to Rebirth, two other guys did the music, and I don't remember their names, and this time I'm not going to bother Googling it. But
Ridiculon is their name they use.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's it. Ridiculon. But their music, they took out all the fun out of the music. It's like if they did music that purely grew on the kind of dark setting that Binding of Isaac has, like any kind of playful thing that was in the previous soundtrack is just gone in this one, and I still appreciate it being good despite the fact that there is a lot of the damage sample library used by Heaviosity. Like a lot of the percussion is basically that sample library, so it's one of those soundtracks which I'm like, oh, I know where this is from, I now don't like it. But yeah, like, it was a weird change because it kind of works, but because we've had the music from before, it's like we compare it to that, and it's just like, no, I much prefer the previous music. But yeah, besides that, both of them had decent audio overall, so that's good. What other ones have we got which are good indie games that have good music, or rather audio, I should say?
What else do we have? We also wanted to, you wanted to talk about Limbo as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Which, I guess probably, well, to be honest, it was a while since I played it, and in terms of actual musical content, don't really have much to talk about. But
it doesn't really have music.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the odd kind of ambient pad synth every now and again, but otherwise, most of the audio is just really, really good sound effects.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example as well of where the audio stylistically has really
Mm.
followed the game design very well, because that's
Yeah.
another thing, not every game needs like, high definition sound effects and like
Mm.
this really realistic thing. And I think that's the perfect example of, you know, with the style that you get with a lot of indie games, not necessarily a particular, art style, but
Mm.
that kind of less realistic, more kind of stylized, artistic thing. I think it's a great example of a game where that's really been nailed in the music and, well, the
Mm.
audio, I should say.
Yeah, I don't know, like I don't know if there's an official soundtrack, but I certainly have a soundtrack for Limbo, which is literally just all these sound effects. But oh, excuse me, I actually really enjoy listening to that, just because it's such well done audio that you're like, ah, I could actually listen to this despite it not being musical in the traditional sense.
Well, that can work quite well. I mean,
Mm.
I often find that when I'm trying to get stuff done, I put on Brian Eno's ambient albums,
Mm.
music for airports, and the other 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
And I think this is also a game that, whether that is a direct influence or not, I can't say, because I'm not even sure if that's ever been questioned or not. But
Mm.
that kind of ambient style of audio is something that works really well for not getting in the way of the game itself as well.
Yeah.
And again, it can be done well and it can be done badly.
Mm.
This is obviously a case where it's been done well, and I can't think of a bad example off the top of my head.
There's plenty of
Of
good
ambient
examples
stuff,
of
yeah.
bad ambient stuff.
Yeah,
I just usually um what's the word, block them out of my head and move on, so that's probably why I don't remember any.
exactly, yeah.
But yeah, just to quickly rattle off a third good indie game with solid music or solid audio, I've recently been playing Armello, which I kickstarted back in the day. Which, for people who don't know, Armello is essentially a cross between Game of Thrones and Watership Down. And in kind of board game form.
Oh, cool.
So you play as like cute, cuddly characters, like a bunny with a rapier, or a wolf with a blade, or a big bear with a staff and junk. And the idea is that the king lion is going to die from this poison in like the X amount of days, and you've got to basically claim the throne. That's the goal of everyone playing. You go around, you play your turn, you roll around the board, you play cards, you fight things by rolling die. It's actually quite fun, if a little slow. But the reason I've included it is because in our talk is because the music's actually very, very, very atmospheric, for considering you're literally just looking at what is essentially a very elaborate board game. Like the music was written by, and I've got it down here because I didn't want to get the name wrong this time, was Lisa Gerard, which I didn't really know of the name, but apparently she's done a lot of kind of movie score helping. So she has credits on a lot of kind of Hans Zimmer stuff, like Gladiator and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I remembered her name being on the list of many people that have come through
the Zimmer Factory,
Remote Control Productions, or whatever it's called nowadays.
Hans Zimmer School for Witchcraft and Wizardry.
Yeah, she's actually Australian, or come from Australia at some point.
Yeah, well, Armello's made by a bunch of people in Sydney, so it's a very Australian game. But she wrote the music for it, and it shows that she's a veteran of audio, because it's very atmospheric, but at the same time, like it really fits with the kind of scene. I guess. So I added that one on because it's a recent one, which I was like, oh yeah, this is a good indie game with good music. So yeah, those are the three. We should hopefully cancel out the three which I mentioned before. And now I'm even again.
We're even now, yeah.
Yeah, which is good.
We love indie. I hate indie.
No. But yeah, no, we've kind of established that audio is extremely important in these types of games, because besides Starbound, like any game that we're talking about with with poor audio, I imagine a lot of people probably haven't heard of before. I mean, I'm going to guess that many people probably don't know what Salvation Prophecy is. One, because it's really old now. By gaming standards, it's maybe 5 years old, I guess. Maybe even less than that, but that's pretty old in game standards.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Um, so I imagine like the large majority of people who listen to this don't know what it is. But anyone who's anyone, you say like Binding of Isaac and be like, oh yeah, and we say Limbo and like, oh yeah, and maybe not Armello. Maybe been in the news recently, but these ones are memorable or well-known games, and I'm willing to say that audio probably had a role in that reason.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even though we're not by any means saying that audio is the most important part of a game. Obviously, you
No,
still need, if it's a bad game, it won't be saved by good audio. It just won't
no,
be ruined by good audio.
no.
But yeah, it's part of that holistic thing. You can't neglect if you neglect a part of your game.
Mm,
Um, it's got the whole thing's going to suffer. It's all interrelated.
yeah,
So it's and you just have to consider that when I guess when you're an indie developer and a lot more of it is on you, you don't have the luxury of hundreds of staff to split the burden between.
mm,
It's just something that is kind of much more immediate, and always make sure that you find a friendly composer or sound designer or whoever
yeah.
and get them involved.
Yeah, I suppose the best thing to say is that there's certainly a correlation between having decent audio and having a successful, decent game.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that. But yeah, as you said, they don't have the luxury of having hundreds of people. But when you do have the luxury of having hundreds of people, it certainly shows in terms of audio, because we've played, as we've already rattled off a few like Metal Gear Solid and Mad Max recently. There's been plenty of AAA games that have substantially good audio to the point where sometimes they even market based on that audio. I mean, the fantastic example of that was Alien Isolation,
Oh,
which I don't think
definitely.
you've finished yet.
No, I'm very early on in that game. Partly because I've been quite busy lately, but also partly because it is a very freaky game, and I have to take it in small doses.
Yeah, fair
Um,
enough. Yeah, I managed to get through all the way to the end. But the audio in that is fantastic. Like they really did a good job with the sound effects, because when you're walking along and you hear like the alien in the what's the word, in the vents overhead, you literally hear it as if it's overhead. I don't know if they did any kind of binaural wizardry, but it certainly sounds like it when playing, because when you play with headphones, when I was walking along, I certainly felt like it was literally coming from above me.
oh,
um
Sure, yeah, and I guess if there's one genre where you know like you really don't want to screw up the sound, it's
mm,
that survival horror kind of
yeah, the horror sound
category,
type
because
thing.
you quite often you don't have, well, I'm not going to say you don't have gameplay to rely on. Obviously there is gameplay in there,
Mm,
but the best horror games are the ones which kind of get your own head involved and pit you against
mm,
yourself.
mm.
And I think, well, Alien Isolation is one of the best, probably the best horror game I played in a long time now.
Oh yeah.
Um, and yeah, even right early on, and one thing I love about that game that is just happened in general. Obviously they've been so faithful to the feel of the original Ridley Scott movie,
Mm.
right down to the detail in the environments is incredible, and just like it just blew me away. Just kind of when you're not spending your time running around or being scared, I'm usually spending it like marveling at something on the wall or like the consoles on the ground or something like that.
Yeah, because it
But
feels exactly like how the Alien films felt.
oh yeah, perfectly so. But um, the other thing about that game obviously is being set in this kind of desolate space environment.
Mm.
It really becomes a balance between sound and lack of sound. And
Mm.
one other little audio point I want to make that I thought was fantastic was, In the opening sequence just after the prologue, where you are blown out of your shuttle ship, whatever, and
Yeah.
onto the station, the Sevastopol station.
Mm.
They even went to the detail of getting the transfer of sound right, so you don't hear anything while you're flying through the vacuum, and
Mm.
then really Ripley puts her hand on the station or the wire or whatever it is, and you hear the sound that would be transferred through that. And that's just kind of, to me, that's just the prime example of the level of detail that they've even gone into with the audio. Like they've thought about how you would hear that sound if it was happening. And again, you mentioned it as well with the vents, and how not just putting the sound in, but actually crafting the sound as to how you should hear it. And that's really what tricks your brain into making it feel like it's real.
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
is just
Sure.
it's an incredible feat as well. Apart from anything, to kind of have that come across in in a game where there's so much detail going in, and it that all has to be crafted and designed and put in. It's marvelous.
Yeah, I mean, Alien Isolation is probably a great example of all aspects of audio being important. Because I know I've spoken with this before with other people, and because I'm a composer, they immediately assume I'm talking about the music, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the music should be better." But I'm talking about all aspects of audio, because sound design, to some extent, is just as important, because it's the thing that shapes the world, and then the music, I guess, is what tells it. If I'm going to get all philosophical on you.
Sure. And and the other thing is as well that the music, like if you want to separate music out from the rest of the sound, they still have to talk to each other. So you can't, even though you might have different people working on it, quite often especially if it's not a small game, you'll obviously have different people working on the audio than to what you have with the music, and you'll even usually have like an audio, whatever you call them, audio manager or coordinator that will kind of marry the two together.
Yeah.
The music and the sound still have to speak to each other. It's not like you can just write some music, throw it in, and then put the sound effects on top, or the other way around, throw the sound effects in and put the music on top. You have to make sure that in the best kind of overall audio worlds of games, they make sure that the two fit in with each other, and neither of them kind of compete with each other or kind of ruin the other. And that's something that the burden is on the composer as much as the kind of or sound director or whoever is running the role.
Yeah.
You need to be aware of what's happening elsewhere in the game world.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's all about the mixing, I guess, which is again something as orchestral composers we tend to ignore, which we shouldn't.
No.
So yeah, we're now being hypocritical. Indie game creators, work on your audio, as opposed to us, who's just like, yeah, fucking mixing. Who cares?
Yeah, don't crush my visions, man. Like, I have ideas.
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah, I mean, we had a spiel. We were meant to have a spiel at the end saying, why overall, kind of wrapping things up. But I think we can pretty much wrap things up by saying, audio is very important. Everyone should focus on it more.
Yeah, and I'd say as well that like it's something that everyone has a responsibility for, and I guess that's my overall bugbear with the whole thing. It's not necessarily that people don't care about, because I think the vast majority of people do care about the audio, and I'm not going to let the handful that don't kind of be generalized and kind of bring everyone else down to that level. But I think it's on the onus as well is on people on both sides, the creators of the music and the audio, and the people that use it, to incorporate that into the process. And if you kind of don't have the experience or the knowledge to implement it properly, to make sure that you learn and work it early enough in the process that you don't kind of sell yourself short at the end and have to put in subpar audio because you ran up to your deadline or whatever.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that can quite often ruin things is when you can just hear the roughness of the audio or the music, or it's just not quite there, and it could be like the ideas underneath it are fantastic, but it just hasn't been executed well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so if you don't know how to audio, just collaborate with someone. I mean, there's possibly millions of, maybe not millions, but many uh, friendly composers and sound designers who'd be more than happy to help you out if needed.
Yeah,
So,
and the majority of them are quite keen to have work, so
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you won't have any problems with that.
Yes, ourselves included. Yeah. Anyway, that should be it. We essentially just say, yeah, audio good. Do it.
Do more.
Yeah. Tick.
Ask if you have problems.
Yeah. That's essentially it. Yeah. So yeah, that was podcast number 3. We're doing quite well. We're probably going to do a lot of recording, both the Let's Plays and the podcasts for the next week or so, just to get us back up to speed after Stefan's break to go and be champion of the Australian Outback.
Yeah, we ruined our lovely. We had a nice little head start with everything, and I selfishly chewed that up quite nicely. So
it's all right. We'll get back on track. It's
yeah, so we'll put in a few chunks. Well, as of now, when we're recording this, we've gotten through the Pikmin Let's Play. That'll be well done.
Pikmin is done. Yeah, Pikmin's already done dusted. I've already released the music for that.
Yeah, we're all set up with that, and check out the music as well that we put together for that. We're getting cracking into our second game now, which is quite exciting.
Banjo-Kazooie.
Banjo-Kazooie, which it's going well so far. We're having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So we'll be probably well into that, if not finished by the time this comes out. So make sure you check that out and have a look through.
No, it won't be finished, not by a long shot. Because this, if we're going by the constant schedule, this is going to be out this Sunday coming.
Oh yeah, I got my timing wrong, didn't I? I thought
which for people who obviously are going to be listening to this not right this instant, we've recorded this on Wednesday, so we're hitting it a bit close for this podcast. But
we'll get there. Well, yeah, but we'll be into the game enough that there'll be a nice bit of content there. So do check that out, because I think I think that's kind of flows a lot nicer for us than Pikmin did. So that's going well.
Yeah, no, it's all good. We'll be doing that. We'll hopefully get some music out for that. I mean, Banjo-Kazooie is a lot easier to write for. In terms of creating music in the two things. I actually have some ideas for that, but I'll pitch them to you next time we play Banjo-Kazooie.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but besides that, I mean, we're cracking on with various other things, and hopefully you'll find something you enjoy.
Yeah, check it all out, and we'd always love to hear any feedback you have. So if there's anything that you don't agree with, or you do agree with, or you just want to kind of yell at us for a little while, we would be happy to hear it. So make sure.
Yeah, usual places: YouTube, Twitter. I think those are the only places at the moment.
At the moment, yeah.
We'll sort out things later. But yeah, okay. Well, if you're still here with us, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
See you next time. Nice.